Hi, everybody. The topic today is the history of Izakaya. And Izakaya are gastropubs, places where you have a drink, and there's a wide variety of things to eat. These began in the early modern period and have roots in medieval Japan and are found globally today. So, going to look at the history of Izakaya. So, the question today is what is the history of Izakaya? And I'll begin by introducing Izakaya, talking about the historical developments that led to Izakaya, and then looking at some developments in Izakaya history after the Second World War. So, if you've never been to an izakaya, what can you expect if you go there? Well, izakaya is a place where you typically drink alcohol. And besides drinking, which you can do in a bar, what sets an izakaya apart is the fact that there's usually food. And the food is, not necessarily very gourmet. It can be. There are very gourmet izakaya, but generally it's comfort food. It's a lot of home style cooking, which in Japan means simmered dishes, grilled foods, very simple things, kind of stuff you would enjoy at home, but here you enjoy it outside in a lively setting with other people. An izakaya can be very small, like the one pictured here is a very small place, just a counter. But other times they're like a sports bar with a lot of tables and open seating, so you can enjoy the crowd. In Japan, these are historically masculine spaces. This is a place where men would go and hang out, and the only people who would be in the izakaya would be women. But that's changed. It's changed in Japan since the 1970s. In a lot of places globally, izakaya are safe places for women to go and drink, compared to the local watering holes where men dominate. So things have changed gender-wise with izakaya. A lot of Japanese restaurants, sometimes the scene is very severe or very zen, if you will, kind of uptight, kind of, if you're not used to it, it can make you uncomfortable. But izakaya are a contrast to that because izakaya are folksy, they're country life or urban, um, all sorts of knickknacks on the walls, uh, tchotchkes and the like to make you feel at home and to help you relax. So it's a very folksy experience sitting in an izakaya, whether that means some sort of country setting, some sort of idealized village that you're sitting in the midst of, or maybe you're imagining sitting in some old pub or some izakaya rather, from early modern Japan. That's the ambience of an izakaya. And what sets izakaya apart from, I think, a lot of places where you might get food and drink together is the variety of foods. It used to be only simple foods were served at izakaya, but now you can get practically anything, from sushi to Western foods to Thai food, Chinese food. I think about all the different kinds of foods I've eaten at izakaya, and it's bewildering, from large Chinese noodle style dishes to sushi to grilled tofu, um, wonderful seafood dishes, wonderful rice pot dishes, simmered foods, all sorts of, like, fried foods, of course, um, fried chicken, all a wide variety of things. And usually these foods are meant to share. So you don't get your own plate, you get it for the group. And typically you sit down and you order something to drink, something to eat, and that might be enough for you. Or you might decide you want more, and you can order more to drink, and you can make it a whole meal. Or else maybe you just want a snack and a drink with some friends, and then izakaya is perfect. You can do that and still go home for dinner, or go off to another izakaya and enjoy another round of drinks and food. So it's a very versatile restaurant in terms of its dining experience. You don't have to have a full meal there. You can just snack and drink and spend time with friends. So this slide looks at the history of izakaya, where they developed from. And actually, it's got a lot of other information on here too. I've broken it down into places that serve alcohol, places that serve alcohol and food, and places that serve food alone. And this is done chronologically. So if we go back to the medieval period, the places that are serving alcohol are places that are making alcohol. And by alcohol, I mean sake, because sake is synonymous with alcohol in medieval Japan. So these places are making sake and serving sake. And usually not on premises, it's something that you take home. There are some restaurants that develop very basic things for travelers. They appear in the 16th century, roadside tea houses and food vendors and the like. But medieval period doesn't have quite the rich restaurant culture that early modern Japan has. And in early modern Japan, we see the development of a specific sake cellar called a sakaba. And then sake production becomes its own thing. That occurs in breweries, and the sake is sold in a different location. In terms of places where you could eat, you could still find roadside tea houses, you could still find vendors, and indeed there are many more of these in the early modern period. What also develops are tea houses, and when we say tea house, it's really a place where you might have tea, but it's also a place where you might meet a courtesan. So these are in the prostitution quarters, the licensed quarters. This is a place where men go buy sex. It is a tea house. Izakaya also developed in the early modern period, and so do restaurants. And I have a little arrow pointing from these tea houses down to bars and snacks. Snacks are hostess bars that exist in modern Japan, places where men go to drink and not so much eat, but to seek female companionship. And actually, women go to men's bars too, places where they can hang out with cute boys. And there's all sorts of varieties of these snacku. I'm not going to talk too much about them, but that's part of the places, part of the drinking landscape in modern Japan is bars and snacks. And then today, of course, we have izakaya and restaurants where you can get food and alcohol. And you can get food on the streets. You can get takoyaki from a vendor, or you could get ramen. All kinds of street foods are available in Japan. So that's a bit of a chronology, give you an overview, and I'm going to talk about these things in a little more detail in the next slides. Have a sip of sake first. All right, so in the medieval period, we had sakaya, which are places where people would buy sake and brew sake. These were large storehouses. These start appearing late 14th century, 15th century in Kyoto, and there are hundreds of them. And if you think about what sake brewing was like that day, people brewed sake in large ceramic containers, and you couldn't move these containers very easily. So sake was hard to transport. So what that meant is people in the neighborhood would bring a small jug, a tokuri, to one of these places, and they would fill it up. And it's kind of easy to imagine that if you're a brewer in Kyoto, in medieval Kyoto, and you are selling sake that you brewed, and there's lots of other sake brewers, well, you might want to lure customers by offering a little bit of food, or maybe giving them an opportunity to taste the sake. So by the 15th century, we have the development of what are called standing bars, tachinomi, in Kyoto, at the sakaya. Now, they're really not officially bars, but they're places where people can sample sake. And I imagine that the smart sake sellers would offer something to their customers to eat too, just so they would buy more sake. So that's the way it works. In medieval Japan, you would have to purchase your sake at the sake seller and then bring it home. Well, brewing changed in the early modern period, and I talk about that in other lectures. Brewing becomes a big business, and there becomes a division between the places that make the sake kura, the sake brewers on the one hand, and the places that are selling the sake on the other. And the places that are selling the sake are called sakaba. And here it's the same old system. You have to bring a container, or maybe you can rent a container from the sakaba, and you fill it, and then you bring it home, and then you drink there. Uh, that's the way it works. So it's just a matter of a change in name, but also change in the fact that sake sellers are not necessarily brewing their own sake, not at all in the early modern period. So that's a little bit about how sake is distributed, and that's how we get the terms sakaba. That's going to come into play in a moment when we talk about the origin of izakaya. But there's another thread in the izakaya story, and that's the development of eateries or restaurants in the early modern period. Um, this is a big topic, but let me give you the executive summary on this. When Tokyo, or what we call Edo, was developing as a city in the 17th century, lots of men are living there. Many of them are samurai. They have to live there because their lords are ordered to live there, and so they're flooding the city. And actually, at some points in Edo's history, there are twice as many men as there are women living in this city. Well, why is that important? Well, you have a huge market suddenly for people who want prepared foods. And it's not just men who want to dine out. A lot of people are living in small quarters. It's hard to prepare a full meal. You might be able to cook some rice, but it's hard to prepare rice and prepare other dishes. So what do? You go out and get carry out. Now you can dine on the street like these people in the slide. You can see some of them are dining on tempura. That's the stand that's on the far left. Then we have some kind of squid on a stick in the middle. And then a stand called a four coin stand, or a shimonya, or a simmered food stand, a niuriya. And what these are, they offer a variety of simmered foods. So simmered vegetables could be some beans, it could be some sort of simmered tofu or what have you. But it's like a dollar shop in that everything is the same cost. It's all 4 copper coins. So these are called 4 copper coins shops. And so if you're living in Edo and you don't want to cook, you can go to one of these shops and you can get your meal. You could assemble a number of things and bring them home, and then you have your rice. And maybe necessarily don't even have to cook that rice. You have leftover rice. And so you're all set for your meal. And there's a proliferation of these shops in the 17th century, and lots of places where you can get a quick bowl of noodles too in the 17th century. So simmered food shops, they're a real part of the story of izakaya. And these two parts of the story come together in the 18th century when someone thinks, why don't we combine these two models of a place where you can get sake and you can also get simmered foods. And not only that, you don't have to get them to carry out. You can sit down and eat them. So we have the creation of this term, the niuri izakaya. And niuri, of course, is from simmered food. I means sitting, and zakaya is sake shop. So literally a simmered food sitting sake shop, which is a mouthful even in Japanese, and this was quickly shortened to izakaya. And here you could get something simple to eat, and some of them, sold takeaway. How would you know it's an izakaya? Well, any shop that sells sake in the city would have a cedar ball in front of it, like a sake brewery. So a sakaba would have that. Also, a izakaya would have that. So that's one way of telling. And a lot of these shops too had rope curtains out in front rather than a cloth noren curtain. They'd have a rope curtain so people could peer inside, and all the good, delicious smells of food could waft out into the streets and lure in customers. And so you could peek inside as you passed, and you could see your friends in there having a great time. And you think, why am I working when I could go inside and join my friends and have some sake or have something to eat and just get a quick bite before I head home? And you can see this particular shop, it's from an illustration from a book, has both carry out and dining in service. And please note, there are some women in the center part of the slide, but they are the waitresses. It's the men who are the customers here. So what would you eat if you went to an izakaya? What would you eat and order in the early modern period? Well, chances are, if you're going to an izakaya, you remember these are not the highest class of eatery. So maybe you'd order sake, but probably you'd order dobroku, which was the unfiltered, quickly made, watered down sake, almost like a energy drink at the time. It's the fuel of daily life, dobroku. So you could order dobroku, which people in Edo called white horse, and you'd order a small amount of that. And it was really inexpensive. By modern standards, this is only like $1 or $2 to order a serving of dobroku or sake. And that's how you'd order it. You wouldn't order by the brand. You'd say, okay, I want one serving of the dobroku, or I'd want one serving of the slightly better sake, because we have something to celebrate today. And then you could sit down and order some foods. And what would that be? It could be grilled sardines. It could be grilled vegetables. There's this wonderful product called konnyaku, which if you don't know what it is, it's kind of a gelatin, savory gelatin. People order that, and these also, cost you about $1. Really inexpensive stuff. If you wanted to get a little more upscale, you might order some grilled tofu. You might order some soup, perhaps some whale soup. You might order a stew, a nabemono, to share with your friend. So these are all very inexpensive, homespun foods, the kind of things you'd eat if mom was cooking for you, or if dad was cooking for you, because men certainly cooked in the Edo period, even samurai. Very simple fare, and you could enjoy that with your friends, have a drink, and then go on to the next izakaya or go home for dinner. But what are these places like if we went into them? Now we know what to order, but what kind of crowd could we expect? Well, there's a poem here, a haiku, that I translated by one of Basho's disciples. So what would that be? Like late 17th century? Um, it goes like this in Japanese: Nomi ni iku izake no are no hito sawagi. Nomi ni iku izake no are no hito sawagi. Going out to drink, the izakaya is rowdy, there will be a fight. Which I think is such a kind of sums it up about what's going to happen at the izakaya. So, who could you expect to meet in an early modern izakaya? Well, you might find some low-level samurai there. You would find shopkeepers, peddlers, men who carried palanquins, servants, um, all types. And some of these places go late into the night. Others are open in the morning, so you could get a little drink, working man's breakfast, so to speak, on the way to work. So, but by and large, these are lower class eateries, lower class drinking spots, uh, neighborhood spots too. Well, I'm going to skip ahead quite a bit in izakaya history to the post-war period and talk about some developments then. And one of those developments is the development of chain izakaya. In other words, like chain restaurants. There are a number of these that developed in the post-war period. One of the first is actually from before the war. It's called New Tokyo, or in Japanese, New Tokyo, founded by Mori Shintaro in 1937. And Mori was interested, initially, he worked for the beer industry, and he worked uh, on this scheme for the Nippon Beer Company, which makes Ebisu beer. And they thought, how are we going to sell Ebisu beer? We're going to open these beer halls. So he started opening beer halls for Ebisu in Shinjuku in Tokyo. And then from then, he got into izakaya, and he opened one in Yurakucho, calling it the White Palace. And the bottom floor was a German-style beer hall, and the second floor offered beer and Japanese food, and then the third floor was Japanese food, and then he had a cafe on the top. And this idea of kind of the mixture of different food styles, different settings, really took off. And after the war, he moved the company to Yokohama in 1956 and developed this new Tokyo chain. And pretty soon there were about 100 of these izakaya all around Tokyo. But this Mori Shintaro is not only recognized as important for izakaya history. He's sort of the father of the beer hall in Japan. There are so many chain izakaya in Japan that actually it's kind of a challenge to find an independent izakaya. They're kind of like in the world of coffee, Starbucks. Once Starbucks comes to town, it's kind of hard to find that local place. Well, it's true for izakaya too. There's lots of chain izakaya that people go to, and it's kind of hard to find that mom and pop izakaya, although they're still around. Another important transition I want to talk about occurred around 1970, and it's time to the opening of this sort of World's Fair that took place in Japan called Expo 1970. And it was a time, it was a sort of a World's Fair experience where a lot of countries had booths, and they set up restaurants serving their country's food. So initially from the United States, the Howard Johnson's, which was a famous restaurant chain, was supposed to run something. And what this all means in a nutshell is a lot of people went to Expo 70 in Osaka just for the food. So they could try American steak for the first time, and they could try Russian food or French food. And this really initiated a gourmet and dining out boom from 1970. So the early 1970s is when we start seeing fast food come to Japan. So we have opening up in 1970, Kentucky Fried Chicken. Mr. Donut opens in 1971. McDonald's comes the same year, 1971. And then we have these so-called family restaurants. We have these in the United States, of course, like Denny's or Big Boy. But in Japan, these family restaurants were called, or still called, Skylark and Friendly's. And those also debuted in the 1970s. And what this means is not only do we have these two different types of restaurants opening, these fast food restaurants and family restaurants, but suddenly there's a transition in dining out. Previously, the people who dined out were men, predominantly, men alone after work. Well, men with other men after work would be dining out together. It was kind of rare for families and for women to dine out. Now, there were exceptions to that. Certainly, early in the 20th century, people who ran department stores recognized that women needed something to eat, and department stores started developing menus for women and catering for women, encouraging female customers to come, and also children, bringing children to department stores. So those were certainly spaces that women felt comfortable dining out. But by and large, dining out up until the late 1960s was a masculine, male sort of thing to do. But after 1970, that changes. Suddenly, dining out is something for the whole family, hence the term family restaurant. It's something that the family can do on the weekends together. Or young women can explore dining out. Dining out is suddenly something that's a source of entertainment. And think about too, the Japanese economy has really improved in this period, so people have more money to dine out. Japan is going through its so-called economic miracle at this time, so things are really improving economically. There's more money to spend, and so it's not just men who are dining out anymore. It's families on the weekends. It's young women who want something, entertaining. And you see that reflected in women's magazines too in this period, because women magazines debut for women in their late teens and early 20s, and these tell them, the pleasures of dining out. Whereas previously, if you were to read a women's magazine from before this time, yes, there's articles about food, but it's mostly about how to cook for your family, not about dining out. So this is a huge change. Dining changes a lot in the 1970s. There's new types of restaurants. And then women and kids are now suddenly customers for these places. And that's reflected in izakaya. Some izakaya recognize we have this whole sector of the population that we've been ignoring so far. So let's start catering to women. And the example I can give you is this chain izakaya called Tengu. There you can see Tengu up there. Tengu is a long-nosed goblin. The Tengu chain was founded by Ida Tamotsu in 1969, and his dad was involved in the liquor trade, so he knew a lot about booze, knew a lot about the good stuff too, because he traveled in Europe, he traveled in parts of Japan, and he decided what he's going to do is he's going to have a Western style pub on one floor of his restaurant, and there he's going to offer German beer, imported wine and scotch, and Western style foods. And then on another floor he'll have Japanese, beers and foods and things like that. So 2 floors of this restaurant that he developed. But what he realized is that customers wanted both at the same time. They wanted to eat Japanese food and drink Western wine, or they wanted German beer with Japanese food. So quickly this amalgam appears where he combines Japanese food, Western beverages, and this is meant especially to appeal to younger customers who want to try new things. It's meant to appeal to women. And it really was a takeoff for the growth of his izakaya chain in the 1970s. So he thought, what do young people want? They want something new. They want to try new beverages. Sake, sadly, in the 1970s is having a bad reputation because of the way sake is being produced at this time. And that's something I talk about in a different lecture. And either recognizes that he's got a whole new market here out there that is untapped. And so let's try to bring women customers in, and does a lot of things to try to bring them to his izakaya. Moving on, we see the izakaya now global. There are global izakaya chains, besides the fact that we see independent izakaya developing outside of Japan. There are some global chains. One of these is Zuma, which has locations in the Middle East, and here's one in Miami. They have 25 locations worldwide. And it's interesting, we think about the history of izakaya. Izakaya in Japan were traditionally male drinking spots. But as izakaya have gone overseas, they have become places which are safe spots for women to drink. Women will avoid the local watering hole where the men go, but instead they'll go to a new izakaya. And there they can enjoy all kinds of foods. They can have a drink. Izakaya understand that people are not drinking as much alcohol as they once did, so they offer low alcohol versions of things. They offer a wide variety of foods to appeal to different customers, and they're very comfortable surroundings. So you might feel intimidated to go to a regular Japanese, when I say regular, more upscale Japanese restaurant, but Izakaya, it has that down home, folksy atmosphere that's very welcoming. Yet at the same time, there's that connection with Japanese cuisine, which globally is recognized for its fine qualities. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. It has the elitism of Japanese cuisine without the sort of elitist sort of setting of some upscale Japanese restaurants. Very comfortable spots. I probably going to become even more of a trend in dining. Internationally, we'll see more and more izakaya, and people get to try more and more different varieties of foods, of Japanese foods, which is great. Get away from just eating ramen and sushi all the time, which aren't bad, but there's more to Japanese cuisine than those two foods. So, I hope you like this lecture. I delve into izakaya history even more in my book, Kampai, The History of Sake, which is coming out in October 2025. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. And I hope you learned something from this lecture. Take care until next time.